Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines we're tracking for you this evening. Indian equities erase initial weakness comfortably and close in the red for a major part of the session. The sensex and the nifty gain over 0.5% each. US President Donald Trump says all cars shipped to the US starting the 2nd of April will face 25% tariffs. Reports say the levy will be imposed on car parts as well. As the EU and Canada slam the move, Trump doubles down, threatens further tariffs if EU colludes with Canada to cause economic harm to America. New York Times reports that the U.S. government agency responsible for administrating civilian foreign aid plans to halt the over $1 billion funding to Gavi, the global alliance that provides vaccines and life-saving care to developing nations. Gavi's chief executive says that surprise halt in funding would have a disastrous impact on global health security. CNBC-TV18 learns that officials from the PMO, the Commerce Ministry and the External Affairs Ministry are in active discussions on cutting tariffs on imports from the US. Sources say several categories, including cars, medical equipment, gems and jewelry, under review. No final decision has been taken so far. Sources say a note from the Electronics and IT Ministry proposing a 25,000 crore rupee PLI scheme for electronic component manufacturing is likely to be sent to the cabinet soon, indicate that the government may be flexible about hiking the outlay depending on industry's response. A day after announcing a ceasefire and attacking energy infrastructure, both Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of breaking the terms. Russian forces launch a mass drone attack on 2 cities in Ukraine, killing over 10 people. Ukraine reports downing 56 of 117 drones launched by Russia. Prime Minister Modi writes a letter to Bangladesh's chief advisor Mohammad Yunus, wishes him on his country's Independence Day, calls for stronger bilateral relations based on mutual sensitivity to each other's interests and concerns. This is the Prime Minister's first official correspondence with Yunus since the Nobel laureate assumed office after the ouster of Sheikh Hasina. The Lal Street ended the March series on a healthy note, with the Nifty reclaiming the 23,500 mark today. The Nifty and the Sensex gained nearly 0.5%, with banks outperforming. Auto stocks did hit a roadblock, this after US President Donald Trump's tariff announcements that came in. However, for this series, the market has snapped its 5-series losing streak to record its biggest gain in a series since September of last year. 100 points higher on the Nifty, the Sensex closing 300 points higher, 200-point gain there for the mid-cap index, and a 360-point uptick for the Nifty Bank. Prashant is standing by to wrap up the day's trading action for us. Prashant, holding, that's the market sentiment at this point in time.
Well, last 2 days, markets were a little slow, even sideways. Today, well, that turned and the market looked much better, despite, of course, waking up and coming in to, the headlines that Trump is imposing 25% tariffs on autos, which were automobiles and auto parts, which were not made in the US. There was a knee-jerk reaction, but that got bought into, and then we never really looked back. It was not a big day on the upside. Market breadth was kind of mixed, but nothing to complain really. The Nifty was up about 0.5%. The Nifty Bank was up in that zone as well. The small cap index really stood out, 1.3% higher. Mid caps were a little more subdued, really coming in today. I think declines outnumbered advances by just a tad bit, but that kind of tells you that even as the market was up 0.5%, it was not showing up everywhere in the broader markets. Now, I'll just start with the large caps here. So gains coming through in Hero MotoCorp, which was up 3.5%. Bajaj Finserv was up 3%. IndusInd Bank was up about 3%. Adani Enterprises, Trent and Wipro were some of the other names which were up about 2% apiece. On the downside, Tata Motors, of course, was the standout loser from the word go. Of course, tariffs do make a difference for Tata Motors, especially for the JLR business. Sun Pharma, Kotak Bank, Eicher were the other losers. I mean, this is actually just 4 names with losses in excess of 1%, so nothing very dramatic at all. I'll start with what was down in the broader space since declines outnumbered advances. There was Capri Global, which saw a 28% turnaround from the day's high. Number one volume-led loser, down about 16% on the day. Tata Motors, as I said, JB Chemicals was down 5.5%. Of course, there was a block there. Sona Comstar was down 6%. Again, the tariff news. Sundaram Finance was down 7%. There was Idea Forge down 4%. Power Mesh was down 5%. Rolex Rings down about 5% or so. But this is largely the bulk of the volume-led losses that we saw across the board in the markets today.
Right, Prashant, many thanks for joining us. In the energy market, crude oil prices nearing a one-month high on renewed concerns over a trade war and tightened global supply. Trump's 25% tariffs on Venezuelan oil buyers also supported prices. Brent crude hovered near the $74 per barrel mark, and that's where it is currently. The big global story that we're tracking this evening, President Trump has announced tariffs of 25% on all cars shipped to the United States. Reports suggest the levy will be imposed on car parts as well. Now, the new tariffs will come into effect post the 2nd of April. Speaking at the Oval Office, Trump said he expects auto companies to relocate to the United States and build new sites or expand its existing ones. The U.S. imported $474 billion worth of automotive products in 2024. Mexico is the top supplier of cars to the U.S., followed by South Korea, Japan, Canada and Germany. The White House has said that these tariffs will be imposed in addition to the existing levies on goods from Canada and Mexico.
For doing business in our country and taking our jobs, taking our wealth, taking a lot of things that they've been taking over the years. They've taken so much out of our country. What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff. We start off with a 2.5% base, which is what we were at.
Sanjay Suri joins us now from Washington on the challenges that the U.S. may face while implementing these tariff changes. Sanjay.
Another round of tariffs from President Trump before the big one due on April the 2nd. Trump has announced now a 25% tariff on all car imports into the U.S. that he said will go into effect on April the 2nd and that he would begin to start charging the following day. These tariffs would be on top of the tariffs already in place and already announced. The U.S. administration believes that this tax on automobiles will bring in at least $100 billion of new revenue every year. And Trump has said these taxes on automobiles will be permanent. And to follow will be tax benefit offers to American buyers of cars built in the U.S. But this is not going to be a simple and straight tariff. A lot of the cars imported into the U.S. come from Canada and Mexico, and these have components made in the U.S. And that, he said, will be proportionally factored into the 25% tariff. The tariffs will be reduced in proportion to the value of an imported car's American-built components. This opens up a nightmare world of certification and accounting. On the other hand, to add to this, the tariff will apply to non-American components of cars built in the U.S. This would then be a decision particularly hard to implement. It is not clear who will police this, who will carry out inspection and certification of every car or even every lot of cars along these lines, and what the cost of all this would add up to.
Well, that certainly is right. Certainly not the ease of doing business there. Sanjay, many thanks for joining us. The European Union, Canada and Mexico have slammed the tariffs on automobile imports. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has expressed regret about the U.S.'s decision. She said the bloc would continue to seek negotiated solutions while protecting its economic interest. The European Auto Manufacturers Association also voicing its concerns. The association has urged President Trump to consider the negative impact of tariffs on domestic manufacturing as well. And, of course, the impact on the American consumer. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney called new tariff announcements a direct attack on Canadian workers. He added that the tariffs were a betrayal of the trade pact between U.S. and Canada. President Trump doubled down following the EU and Canada's reactions. In a post on Truth Social, President Trump said that larger levies would be imposed if the two work together to harm the U.S. economically. Remember, Canada is already working towards providing industrial support for Europe's rearmament push. India's automotive industry has not been immune to the U.S. tariff announcement either. Shares of Tata Motors, Samvardhan Motherson and Sona BLW declined in trade today. Sudarshan is standing by to explain to us what these tariffs could mean for Indian automakers and auto component makers. Sud.
Auto stocks were under pressure in today's trade on the back of announcement by US President. He has announced that he'll impose 25% tariffs on all the cars that are not made in the US. Also, as per reports, tariffs will be imposed on auto parts as well, and these tariffs will be effective April 2. Now, the first up on the list is Tata Motors, which will be impacted by this tariff, and the reason is US is one of the important markets for JLR, which forms nearly 30% of its total volumes. The most important important part is JLR does not have production facility in the US, and most of the cars that JLR sells in the US are imported from other countries. And JLR forms nearly 70% of Tata Motors' consolidated revenue. And due to this tariff, its revenue can be impacted by more than 20%. Next up on the list is Samvardhana Motherson. This will not be impacted directly by tariffs, but it supplies auto parts to those automakers which export cars to the US. So here the impact can be seen in the range of 6 to 7%. Now, if US government decides to impose tariffs on auto parts, two major companies that can be impacted are Balkrishna Industries and Sona BLW. For Balkrishna Industries, 17% revenue comes from the US, and for Sona BLW, US contributes nearly 43% to its total revenue for the fiscal. Last in the list is, if US government goes ahead and imposes tariffs on bikes and trucks, then some of the companies which can be impacted in that list are: first, Eicher Motors, for which US forms nearly 2 to 3% to total volumes of Royal Enfield. Second in the list is for Bharat Forge. 40% of standalone revenue comes from North America. And for Ramkrishna Forging, 26% revenue is contributed by North America. So these are some of the companies which might be impacted by the tariffs that are announced by US President Donald Trump.
All right, Sid, many thanks for joining us. And speaking of tariffs, the government is in active discussion to consider cutting tariffs on key American imports. Sources tell CNBC-TV18 the government is assessing potential duty cuts on specific goods. Timsy is standing by with more. Timsy, take us through the categories that the government is looking at a potential tariff reduction at.
Well, sources have told CNBC-TV18 that the top officials from the Prime Minister's office, Commerce Ministry and Ministry of External Affairs are in active discussions to consider tariff cuts for the US. As we speak, comprehensive review of the current import categories and duties is being undertaken, and on the drawing board is to see in what permutation combinations tariff cuts can be offered to the US. Given this, sources said, even as no final decision has been made, still, some of the top categories where there could be a tariff cut includes medical and scientific instruments, cruise ship, aircraft, spacecraft, cars, turbojets, propellers, high-end jewelry, gems and jewelry, footwear, plastic polymers, organic chemicals, etc. Just to add some perspective here, total goods imports by India from US in the calendar year 2024 stood at $35 billion, which is a growth of 6.7% from the imports undertaken in the calendar year 2023. Let's see what India has to offer and how soon, along with what India gets in turn as a deal from the US, something that we'll have to wait and watch for.
Timsy, many thanks. Meanwhile, Tesla stock fell 6% yesterday on the back of data from Europe hinting at a slowdown in sales. That's last month. Tesla sales in Europe have fallen by 49% in the first 2 months of the year compared to last year. This even as all battery electric car makers saw a growth of 29%. There have been complaints about an aging lineup of vehicles from Tesla. Significant backlash against CEO Elon Musk's association with the Trump administration has also hurt Tesla's demand. The Trump administration is planning to stop its funding for Gavi, the global alliance that provides critical vaccines to developing countries. The New York Times has obtained a U.S. Agency for International Development document, which has a list of foreign aid projects that the administration plans to continue or terminate. As per the document, Trump has decided to end over 5,000 U.S. aid awards and continue with just 898 programs. In a statement, Gavi said it hasn't received termination notice for the grant and is engaging with the White House. It added that Congress approved $300 million for Gavi in its FY25 budget and has signaled the intent to ensure that the funding continues. In a conversation with me earlier this month, the Gavi board chairman had said he hoped that the U.S. would continue to be a donor to the organization.
Look, until now, the moment we are speaking, we have not received any negative reference to Gavi from the new administration. And the last time we've got the interaction with the United States, the previous Trump administration, in fact, it was a bipartisan support to Gavi. It was a very generous support to Gavi because it was during COVID in the transition from the Trump to the Biden administration. So I hope that the same commitment will last.
Well, an uncertain future, therefore, the global vaccine alliance if the US does decide to withdraw a significant amount of the funding. The US president also said he may cut tariffs on China to help seal a deal for TikTok to be sold by its owner, ByteDance. Trump also said he was willing to extend the deadline for ByteDance to find a non-Chinese buyer. China swiftly rebuffed Trump's offer. The country's foreign minister reiterated Beijing's stance that acquisition should be decided by companies. In a major crackdown on visa fraud, the US Embassy in India has cancelled over 2,000 visa appointments and suspended the accounts linked to those. Officials say the appointments were made by bots and violated the embassy's scheduling policies. This comes amidst the mounting backlog of US visa appointments in India. Here's a CNBC-TV18 exclusive. A note from the Electronic and IT Ministry proposing a 25,000 crore rupee PLI scheme for electronic component manufacturing is likely to be sent to the cabinet soon. Sources tell us that the government may be flexible in hiking the outlay depending on industry's response. Ashmit joins us now with the details. Ashmit, this has now been in the making for several months now. When can we expect the approval?
Well, it's been a long time coming as far as this PLI is concerned, the electronics components PLI. The latest that we're picking up from sources within the government is that the cabinet note has been prepared and that it will be put forth before the cabinet. It will be sent up to the cabinet for approval. Now, this has been a long time coming. There's been a lot of speculation. There's been a lot of conversations over the last 3 to 4 months over the nature, shape and form of this PLI scheme. Let's break down the details. Now, as far as the details are concerned, the PLI, as the name suggests, is aimed at electronics components like batteries, displays, PCBs. That's the main thrust of this electronics PLI. In terms of what the outlay looks like, but we're given to understand that the figure in mind that the government has put forth is 25,000 crore rupees. That's a large figure, but not as large as what the industry had sought. The industry had made a pitch for 40,000 crore rupees. The concern, however, is that the government is now saying that they're okay with 25,000 crores for now, and they're open to some amount of flexibility to increase the outlay at a later date should there be an overwhelming response from the industry. So 25,000 for now can go up even further. As far as what the likely investments are, well, the government is estimating that this PLI could attract investments worth over 40 to 45,000 crore rupees. So that's the kind of figure that the government is working with. The government is quite clear. It's excited. It's keen on the mobile PLI that has performed well. Now it is hoping that this PLI will bring in the ecosystem here, the components ecosystem, and thereby adding for more localization and value addition here in India.
Ashmit, many thanks for joining us. Up next, Prime Minister Modi writes a letter to Bangladesh Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus, wishes him on his country's Independence Day, calls for stronger bilateral relations based on mutual sensitivity. That and more when we return. You're watching Business 360. Prime Minister Modi has written a letter to Bangladesh's Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus, wishing him on his country's Independence Day. In the letter, Prime Minister Modi has called for stronger bilateral relations based on mutual sensitivity to each other's interests and concerns. The government is planning to launch a ride-hailing service modelled after Uber and Ola called Sehkar Taxi in the coming months. Under the initiative, cooperative societies will be able to register two-wheelers, taxis, rickshaws and four-wheelers. While speaking, the Lok Sabha Home Minister Amit Shah, who also holds the Ministry of Corporation portfolio, said the profit will go directly to the drivers and not to the intermediaries. Both Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of breaking the ceasefire a day after agreeing to pause attacks on energy infrastructure. The planned ceasefire in the Black Sea is in jeopardy. This after the EU refused to agree with Russia's demand to reconnect its state bank to the international payment system. Europe said that this would not happen until Russia withdrew from Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russian forces continue to attack Ukraine, launching a mass drone attack on 2 cities. At least 25 Palestinians have been killed and 82 injured in Israeli attacks carried out across Gaza in the past 24 hours. Hamas said its spokesman has been killed in northern Gaza. Meanwhile, the Israeli military continues its assault across the occupied West Bank, raiding a town in North Bethlehem. It's been a tough week for companies looking to go public after regulatory scrutiny intensified. Indira IVF has withdrawn its IPO papers. SEBI has put WeWork India's IPO on hold, while Star Agri Warehousing is facing disclosure-related troubles. Rachna is standing by with the details. Rachna, take us through what's happening in the IPO market and specifically for these 3 firms.
Well, Indira IVF Hospital has withdrawn its draft IPO papers, while SEBI has placed WeWork India's IPO in abeyance, raising concerns about regulatory scrutiny and market conditions. These developments highlight the market regulators' increased oversight on transparency and compliance. So let's start with Indira IVF, which had planned to raise about 3,500 crore via a fresh issue and an OFS. The company filed its draft papers on February 13, but has now decided to withdraw them. The timing has sparked specific speculation, especially with a Bollywood biopic on its founder Ajay Murdia releasing on March 21. This movie stars Anupam Kher and Isha Deol in lead characters. But this was almost a month after Indira IVF submitted its draft papers to the Securities and Exchange Board of India on February 13th. However, the company has denied regulatory interference, saying the withdrawal was a commercial decision. Meanwhile, WeWork India's IPO process has hit a roadblock too. SEBI has placed the company's filing in abeyance, meaning the issuance of regulatory observations has been put on hold. WeWork India, backed by the Embassy Group, had filed its IPO papers on January 31st, proposing for a fresh and an OFS component and to sell about 4.3 crore shares in the OFS. SEBI, however, has not disclosed any specific reason for this decision, adding to the uncertainty around the company's listing plans. But it's not just these two. There's also Star Agri Warehousing's 450 crore IPO that is facing regulatory challenges. SEBI has flagged issues with key performance indicator, the KPI disclosures, and a lack of clarity on fund utilization because the company seems to have a lot of cash on their hands for now. The company had filed for an IPO with a fresh issue component and an OFS of 2.69 crore shares, but concerns over financial transparency have put its plans on hold. What's clear, however, is that SEBI is tightening its grip on IPO-bound companies, demanding more detailed disclosures and stronger compliance measures. With this heightened scrutiny, companies looking to list will have to ensure greater financial transparency to clear these regulatory approvals.
All right, Rachna, many thanks for joining us. And with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of Business 360. The news will continue right here on CNBC-TV18. Stay tuned. We're back in a moment with more.